Order, please.
Your Honor, the Lieutenant Governor is without.
Sweatpants on.
It is the wish of Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor, that ladies and gentlemen be seated.
May it please your honor, the General Assembly of the province has at its present session passed certain bills to which, in the name and on behalf of the General Assembly, I respectfully request your honor's assent.
An act to amend Chapter 123 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Degree Granting Act. An act respecting the practice of registered nurses. An act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act. An act respecting licensed practical nurses. An act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act. An act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act. An act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act. An act respecting the profits of criminal notoriety. An act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act. An act respecting the administration of justice. An act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. An act to amend Chapter 505 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Wills Act. An act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 1996, the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act. An act to amend Chapter 89 of the Acts of 1982, the New Minas Water Commission Act. An act to amend Chapter 224 of the Acts of 1920, an act to incorporate the Temple Sons of Israel, Sydney. An act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1991, the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act. An act to exempt the Kingston Food Bank from municipal taxation in the County of Kings. An act respecting the administration of justice. An act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. An act to amend Chapter 14 of the Acts of 1993, the Tobacco Access Act. An act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 2003, the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualifications Act. An act to amend Chapter 340 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Pension Benefits Act. An act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Maintenance Enforcement Act. An act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish of Nova Scotia. An act to amend Chapter 55 of the Acts of 1963, the Halifax Regional Water Commission Act. An act to amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act. An act to amend Chapter 9 of the Act of 2001, the Order of Nova Scotia Act. An act to protect the civilian employment of members of the Canadian Forces Reserves. An act to amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code, to provide employees with a rest or eating break. An act respecting the municipal taxation of wind turbine facilities. An act respecting the transfer of assets and liabilities of the Nova Scotia Freemasons' Home to the Masonic Foundation of Nova Scotia. An act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. An act to amend Chapter 92 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Consumer Protection Act. An act respecting the taxation of Stora Enso Port Hawkesbury Limited by the municipality of the County of Richmond. An act to amend Chapter 238 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Provincial Court Act. An act to amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act. An act to amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act. An act to establish the Property Valuation Services Corporation. An act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act. An act respecting midwifery. An act to amend Chapter 1 of the Act of 1994-95, the Environment Act. An act to amend Chapter 148 of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the Engineering Profession Act. An act respecting the practice of architecture. An act to amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the Elections Act.
In Her Majesty's name, I assent to these bills.
The Speaker.
Please be seated. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I realize it's not typical to the leader of the Liberal Party to be recognized at such stages, but I'm not sure if any time that we're in minority government is a typical time. Speaker, it's an unwritten rule that members don't usually share what takes place or the words that are said at the Speaker's dinner, where members have a chance to meet together outside of the view of the press, and where we have a chance to speak individually. Mr. Speaker, as I've mentioned then, and I want to mention again now, as you know, Mr. Speaker, all of us here in this House and Nova Scotians have known illness and their families. They've known the challenges of fighting illness, of fighting diseases, and the difficulty that it brings, not only to the individuals who suffer from it, but to their families, and how challenging it can be and how treatments can affect the people in different ways. Speaker, you know, in the operation of this House, while your role as Speaker is essential, it's also essential that the House leaders of each party who help govern legislation and help direct as to how the House is going to go. But the one role that is certainly essential in all of this, Mr. Speaker, is the role of the government House leader. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that as I mentioned before, the former government House leader, the Honourable Ron Russell, was often recognized in this House and by Nova Scotians and certainly by all members here as almost an iron horse in his abilities to, even regardless of his age, his experience and his abilities, that he impressed so many of us in how he was able to conduct the business of this House. And many of us wondered how that would work for the government after his departure from this House. But Mr. Speaker, on behalf of our caucus, and I'm sure on behalf of all members of this House, I want to take the opportunity to recognize the Government House Leader and the Minister of Finance, who I believe during this session of the House Mr. Speaker, I can say that all of our admiration is with the Government House Leader, not only with him, with his wife, with his two sons. And I want to tell you that while Nova Scotians who have been watching the proceedings of this House see what happens on the floor of this legislature, they unfortunately do not see many of the work that takes place behind the scenes, sometimes late at night, and the hard work that takes place. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the work of this Assembly is often dependent on the work and the cooperation and the leadership shown by the Government House Leader. So on behalf of all of us, allow me to say to the Government House Leader and to his family that we do wish you good health and strong determination, and I can tell you that we've all been impressed and inspired by what you have shown to us during this session and the progress and the achievements made on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia during the session are in no small way because of the leadership shown by the Government House Leader. And on behalf of all of us, we wish you very well in the days, months, and years ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And now I would ask the members to please rise and join me in the singing of our national anthem. Thank you. Please be seated. The Honourable, the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll just take a very brief moment before finishing up to, first of all, to echo the comments of the Leader of the Liberal Party, and I think it was well said. And certainly, I'm very proud of the work done by our House Leader, and I know all members are, and we certainly appreciate the comments and appreciation by all members of the House of Assembly. That said, I suppose we could pass the budget for the spring right now, Mr. Speaker. That's right. We have that loving atmosphere, Mr. Speaker. I'm feeling.
Take a lot of our money back.
Yeah, that's right. We can ease this pressure over the next number of months, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's right. That's right. But, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say it is always a pleasure being in the House of Assembly with all members of the House of Assembly. I was talking the other day, and in fact, speaking to the Deputy Premier about this, and I don't for sure recall who exactly had the quote, but I certainly heard John Hamm state it in different meetings we'd be at. I think it may have been Senator Forrestal. And he remarked that, first of all, your province comes first. Next, your constituency, and then your party. And I think the cooperation that we saw during the sitting of the House and the last number of years has been because we've been able to put number 2 and number 3 behind number 1, and that's the province of Nova Scotia, the best province in the country. Best province in the country. And Mr. Speaker, I know it is early, we're not yet in December, but I do want to wish all members the very best of season's greetings and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope everyone takes the time to have some rest and relaxation away from the job and away from the office, and to take that opportunity with your family. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I thank you as well, Mr. Speaker, for another fine job this sitting of the House as well. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, I move that this General Assembly be adjourned to meet again at the call of the Speaker.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. We stand adjourned.